Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 9. As always, this channel is intended for half PPR leagues, and we begin with the players that are unranked due to injury and bye. This week, only two teams are on bye, the Niners and the Steelers, so McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, and Isaac Guerendo cannot be started. Neither can Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, or Cordero Patterson. They're all going to put up bagels this week. I also did not rank Isaiah Pacheco, who remains on IR at the moment. He is in the 7th week of his recovery, and his window was 6 to 8 weeks. So he might come back as early as this game, but he could also come back in a couple of weeks, and we will see based on the practice reports. I may rank him on Saturday, but for now, I don't think he'll be active. So unranked at the moment. Gus Edwards also remains on IR. Marshawn Lloyd has not come off of IR yet either, so didn't rank him. And then Jerome Ford has missed multiple games, not expecting him to play. But quick note on McCaffrey, he might be back in week 10. Off the bye, we could get McCaffrey for the first time this season. So some optimism regarding him, but for now, you cannot start anyone who is on the screen at the moment. Let's get started though. At number 1, I'm going with Derrick Henry, a pretty obvious ranking, who's been a stud this year. Last week was a bit of a letdown, only 14 points, but that is now his floor, and he's a true alpha. It's pretty historic what he's been able to do over the age of 30, yet still dominating the NFL. He is the king for a reason. In his last 4 games, averaging 20.1 points per game, he is lights out. The touchdown feels guaranteed. And while he does get a bottom 6 matchup, I don't care. The Broncos probably don't stop him, probably don't keep him out of the end zone. So still start Derrick Henry with confidence. He remains the RB1 for me. At number 2, I'm going with DeVon Achane at Buffalo, who just vaults up the rankings all the way at the top now that Tua's healthy. He's been elite with Tua as the quarterback this season. In 3 games with Tua, Achane is averaging 23.1 points per game. That would rank clearly as the RB1 in fantasy. He also gets a top 6 matchup against Buffalo this week. The Bills give up just under 25 points per game to the position with 100 rushing yards, 54 receiving yards per game, 5 touchdowns, 4.4 yards per carry. Over the last 5 games, Achane will dominate. He's also owned them in his career. In 3 games versus Buffalo, Achane averages 21.4 points per game with 4 touchdowns in that 3-game sample size. So not only does he own this matchup with Tua on the field, he's dominant. He had 8 targets last week with Tua back on the field, and Achane is now a weekly top 5 running back. As long as he and Tua are healthy, you cannot bench DeVon Achane. At number 3, you also cannot bench Kyren Williams at Seattle, who's a true workhorse this season. In his last 4 games, averaging 24 touches per game, giving you 100 yards per game and 5 touchdowns. He's a stud, always finding the end zone, and that's not going to change. The offense will be better consistently with Puka healthy. They'll be in the red zone a lot more often, and Kyren is usually the safest bet to actually score that touchdown. So he's a lock in your lineup, a top 5 running back, no matter what. Kyren is elite. He also gets a top 3 matchup. The Seahawks, very vulnerable to running backs, allowing 5.9 yards per carry for 148 rushing yards per game and 7 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 weeks. The Seahawks cannot stop running backs. So Kyren will go off. He will play fantastic against Seattle. Number 4, another player who's locked into your lineup, it's Saquon Barkley versus Jacksonville, who's only been the RB16 in points per game over the last 4. Only 14.1 points per game on 18.5 touches, 117 yards per game, but only 1 touchdown over the last month. He has been vultured on the ground by Jalen Hurts multiple times. So that's the only concern. If the touchdowns are evaporating from him, then the ceiling does as well. But at some point, it's going to come right back. I'm not worried about it. He is bust-proof. Giving you 117 yards per game is all I need to know to rank him top 10. So still trusting Barkley. The matchup is top 9. The Jags will not stop him. He'll get back in the end zone. Number 5, a player who's been lights out as of late, Jahmyr Gibbs at Green Bay. In his last 4 games, he's been just as good as Derrick Henry, averaging 20.1 points per game. That is the RB3 in fantasy in that sample size. Only 15 touches per game, though, not elite volume, only 2 catches, but 116 yards per game with 5 touchdowns. Gibbs is a house call machine. He has not been able to be stopped the last 2 games. So I'm trusting him. He's been separating himself from Montgomery as of late, and it does feel like it was wise to draft him in the first round, even though Montgomery was going in round 6. He does look like the better player, and at the moment on a stacked roster, my question for you is he their best player overall? It's hard to say. They have so many elite options. It's kind of a cop-out, though, to say that Penei Sewell or Aiden Hutchinson is their best player. And because their offense relies so much on the run, I think Gibbs is their best option overall. It's not like overwhelmingly they have so many good players. Montgomery could be considered their best player, but Gibbs is better. So Gibbs is fantastic. He's been insane lately. He's a lock in your lineup. Number 6, I have Joe Mixon, who's also a lock in your lineup. In his last 4 games, he's averaging 19.9 points per game. He's the RB4 in that span with just under 21 touches, 110 yards per game, 5 touchdowns in the sample size. And you know they're going to lean on him even more with Stephon Diggs now out for the season. Nico Collins is on IR for 1 more week, so they really need Mixon to step up. Dell has not. And against the Jets, it might be an ugly game, but they probably get the lead and just kill the clock. I think Mixon will be a stud once again, but I do kind of worry about a 30-touch workload in a Thursday night matchup. It's possible in a short week that they do bring in Dameon Pierce to give him a rest a bit more, but still Mixon will be the workhorse. He will be leaned on heavily, definitely score a touchdown against the Jets. He will keep up this pace that we've seen from him so far. So Mixon, definitely a must start, cannot bench him. A high end floor is guaranteed in this offense. At number 7, another player who's locked into your lineup would be Jonathan Taylor at Minnesota, who I think alongside Mixon, because he missed 3 games, you kind of don't exactly understand how good he has been, but especially playing for the Colts, he doesn't get the attention that Mixon has. But Taylor has been just as good as Mixon in his last 4 games, averaging 19.3 points per game. He's the RB5 in that span with the same volume as Mixon, slightly less receptions, but an average of 124 yards per game is even better than Mixon. On the ground, Taylor has been unstoppable from scrimmage. Only 4 touchdowns, though, in the sample size. That's why he's just barely behind Mixon, but they're in the same tier. I think you're definitely starting him. And knowing that Flacco will be the quarterback gives you a lot more confidence in his floor. There's going to be fewer drives that stall out, fewer turnovers, more red zone attempts, as well as less rushing touchdowns that are vultured by the quarterback. So checkdowns go up. I think Taylor gains more value rest of year with Flacco as the quarterback. He is locked into the top 10, and I kind of feel too low ranking him at number 7. I really wanted to put him in the top 5, but at number 7, you're not benching him. He's still bust proof. Start Jonathan Taylor no matter what. At number 8, a player that really deserves some credit lately would be DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. He gets the Arizona Cardinals this week, a top 5 matchup as well, so he should go off again. They give up 25.4 points per game to the position, 121 rushing yards per game, 6 touchdowns, as well as 5.9 yards per carry to opposing running backs. I think Swift will be elite in this game. He looked great on that 50-yard run in the third quarter last week. He was really the only thing that got that Bears offense going last week. So he's on an insane run in his last 4 games, averaging 21 points per game, 133 yards per game with 4 touchdowns. Also a lot of receptions, an average of 3.3 catches per game. He's the RB1 in fantasy over the last 4 weeks. So DeAndre Swift playing lights out. I think it will continue. I think he's officially unbenchable. And kind of like Mixon and Taylor, I feel a little too low ranking him at number 8. He is a lock in your lineup. He's been lights out at the moment. At number 9, I have Bijan Robinson versus Dallas, who again kind of feels like I'm ranking him too low, but that 100-yard floor applies to him as well. And that's the case for every other player in the top 10. His matchup, though, is only average. It's not top 5 like Swift's is, so that's the tiebreaker for me, but Bijan's definitely a lock in your lineup, averaging 18.8 points per game the last month, 19.3 touches, 4 catches per game, 108 yards per game, 4 touchdowns. As long as the touchdowns continue, he will pay off and basically provide what you expected when you drafted him early this season. So although Allgeier is involved more than you would like to see, Bijan's still a stud, still a top 10 play, definitely a lock in your lineup. I'm also starting James Cook this week, no matter what. Against Miami, he torched them back in week 2. He had 3 touchdowns, 95 yards on only 12 touches, and 28 fantasy points was one of the highest we've seen from any running back this season. So he should probably go off again. He's been great in his last 4 games. Just this season, he's also giving you 4 touchdowns, 14.6 points per game. He looked healthy last week against Seattle. So he did miss some time with injury, but I still trust him. The Dolphins have also given up 11 touchdowns to the position in 7 games this season. 3 of them came to James Cook in week 2. So I'm still trusting him. The team also kind of stopped playing before it was over. Once Tua had his concussion, they took their foot off the gas. Cook could have been even better if he played all 4 quarters at that rate. So I definitely trust him. He's going to dominate the Dolphins again, most likely, and I'm not benching him. He is definitely a lock in my lineup this week against the Dolphins. Number 11, another player who's a lock and kind of feels ranked too low at number 11. There's just so many studs this week, is Kenneth Walker versus the Rams. In his last 4 games, he has fallen to 14.2 points per game, which is RB 14 in that sample size. And overall volume is the only concern. While he is getting 5.3 catches per game, you love to see that, especially in full PPR, only 15.8 touches per game total. So only 10 rush attempts, about 6 targets. For some reason, Walker is not getting as much run on the ground. So at some point that will change. He's really good in that department. So I do think it will come back to him in terms of touches. And he's been a stud this season. He's hyper athletic, hyper efficient, although he does not have a single touchdown in his career against the Rams. So while the volume is fantastic, especially in the passing game, the overall volume is a bit weird, and he's their best player, so I'm not worried about it, but the offense probably doesn't look as good if Metcalf doesn't play again. So he's still in your lineup, but at RB11, a little bit lower ranked this week than normal. Number 12, another player I'm ranking a bit lower than I normally do, would be Breece Hall versus Houston. The matchup is bad. The Texans rank bottom 4 against the position, only giving up 16.7 points per game, 95 rushing yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. League average is about 32 receiving yards per game. They only give up 21. So Breece Hall might be held in check this week. And again, he got vultured by Braylon Allen last week for a touchdown. That is very annoying when it happens. So it happens randomly. It could happen again. It probably doesn't, but Breece Hall only has 1 touchdown over the last 4 games. It is kind of important for his overall value. So I don't think this is his best game of the season, a tough matchup, and he's kind of struggled to find the end zone lately. I think he'll be fine from a yard standpoint. The floor is good for 10 points, just like last week, but without the touchdown, you probably don't hit the ceiling, and that's why I only have him at RB12 this week. Not my favorite matchup for him this season, but he'll be back in the top 5 soon. Don't worry, don't panic on Breece. You're still starting him no matter what. At 13, you're also starting Dave Montgomery no matter what as well. Against the Packers, maybe this is a tighter, lower scoring game. In division, weird shit can happen. But in his last 2 games versus the Packers as a Lion, he's been lights out. But one of those games, Jahmyr Gibbs did get hurt. So it's a little bit misleading. He had 32 touches in that game, and it kind of skews these averages. But he did put up 23 points per game in 2 games last season against the Packers. But as a Bear, he was averaging 13.5 points per game on them. So overall in his last 5 games with both franchises, an average of 17.3 points per game. However, the trends have been favoring Gibbs as of the last 2 weeks. He has looked like by far the better player. Montgomery has fallen to RB 19 in points per game the last 4 games, only averaging 13 points per game, which is still a very high floor. I definitely trust it, but only 67 yards per game. It's a little dependent on touchdowns, but his role on the goal line is not going anywhere. He's still a lock for the end zone. I'm still trusting Montgomery. While he has fallen off a little bit compared to Gibbs, I probably won't be ranking them back to back for a while. He's still a lock in the top 15. You're still starting Montgomery no matter what every week. You're also still starting Josh Jacobs every week versus Detroit. He's actually been better than this ranking would suggest. In the last 4 games, thanks to 4 touchdowns, he ranks as the RB8 in scoring with 17.3 points per game. 21 touches, 100 yards per game. The floor is bust proof with Jacobs, but this week he gets a bottom 8 matchup. The Lions are no joke, and while they have only given up 5 running back touchdowns this year, 3 of them came against Kenneth Walker, and overall it's unlikely you score a touchdown on Detroit. They're a very good run defense, but obviously Aiden Hutchinson is missed. He was a factor there. I think he's going to be fine. I'm still starting him, but I'm not expecting 20 plus points here. The Lions rarely let that happen. There's also the risk that Jordan Love won't be the quarterback. If Malik Willis does get the start once again, then while, yeah, they probably emphasize the run game a little bit more, we could see more volume for Jacobs. It also makes the offense more predictable, and the boxes are stacked more often. Jacobs would be less efficient, even on more volume. So while I'm worried about the touchdown hitting this week, it's mainly the quarterback situation that has this whole offense kind of up in the air in terms of how efficient it will be. And that's why Jacobs, I think, is a little bit more risky than his recent history would suggest. You think he'd be top 10. I only have him at number 14. The matchup is a little scary, but you're still starting him. The volume is there, and it's not going anywhere, even if Love is not the quarterback. At 15, I'm starting Aaron Jones this week versus the Colts, who has only scored 1 touchdown the last 4 games, but is also bust-proof, an average of 101 yards from scrimmage. 12.8 points is pretty much guaranteed with Aaron Jones. He gets a top 8 matchup. This week, the Colts rank number 8, giving up 23 points per game to the position, 115 yards per game, 4 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks, and also a lot of receiving yards, 43 on average over the last 4 games. Aaron Jones should dominate from scrimmage. I think he'll get a lot of checkdowns and run very well. 100 yards feels guaranteed for Aaron Jones. So even if he doesn't find the end zone, you're not going to be upset from starting him. And if he does, you're getting at least 16 plus points. I think the ceiling is open for Jones this week. He could go off for a crazy 20 plus point game. So he'll be great in primetime off a mini bye. Aaron Jones will be fully rested. And Ty Chandler's an afterthought. Chandler is not getting any work lately. He put up a bagel in week 8. So Aaron Jones is the stud you're starting, and he's definitely a lock in your lineup this week, a high-end RB2. At 16, I have Kareem Hunt versus Tampa Bay, and in his last 3 games with the Chiefs, he's averaging 15.5 points per game. A lot of touches, not many catches, but 87 yards per game, and 4 touchdowns in those 3 games. He's been great, the RB9 in scoring in that sample size. So love Kareem Hunt. As long as Isaiah Pacheco is gone, then the volume will continue, and that's the key for his success. The Buccaneers also give up 5.5 yards per carry the last 5 games, so as long as he gets that big workload, 20 plus carries, Kareem Hunt should probably go over 100 yards this week, and if the touchdown hits, you'll be ecstatic. Kareem Hunt kind of feels like I'm ranking him too low at number 16, but there are so many studs at the position this week. The matchups really indicate we're going to have some great games at running back in week 9. I'm also trusting Tyrone Tracy no matter what in my lineup. He has clearly been elevated to the alpha RB1 in New York. Last week, the touch split was heavily in favor of him. 20 rush attempts, 3 targets. Meanwhile, Devin Singletary had 2 rush attempts and 3 targets. 23-5 settles the score. Tracy is clearly the back you want for the Giants rest of season. In the last 4 games where Singletary was an afterthought in most of them, he's averaging 15 points per game, 18.3 touches, 3 catches, 105 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. He has been fantastic. So I'm definitely starting him. While he did play poorly against the Eagles, that was a tough matchup. And against Washington, I'm not worried at all. The Commanders are a pretty average defense, but they give up 125 rushing yards per game on 5.4 yards per carry over the last 5 weeks to running backs. So if Tracy gets another 20 plus touches, he's going to be great. If you look back to week 2 when Singletary was the guy, he had 16 fantasy points, 95 yards, and a touchdown on 17 touches against the Commanders the first time around. So as long as this volume continues, which I believe it will, Tyrone Tracy will be bust-proof, a excellent top 20 play in good matchups like this. He's a must start, and I think he's probably going to stay in your lineup for a while moving forward. The volume is bust-proof. So love Tracy. Great matchup for him. I think he goes off and finds the end zone once again. Number 18, I'm going with Alvin Kamara at Carolina, and I want to rank him a lot higher. This is the best matchup overall. The Panthers, last 5 games, give up 31.2 points per game to the position on 131 rushing yards per game, 11 running back touchdowns as well. Kamara is a guarantee to find the end zone in this game. However, in his last 4, he's been bad, 11.3 points per game, only RB 27 in that sample size, and it's all because of the quarterback situation. If Derek Carr gets the start, I will probably rank Kamara top 10. The matchup is that good. I think he would be better than James Cook this week against the Panthers. But if Rattler gets the start, this offense is just so predictable and inept. I worry that even in a good matchup against the Panthers, Kamara wouldn't be able to capitalize at his best full potential. So I do worry about the quarterback situation and the overall efficiency in this matchup. But no matter what, the floor is very high. I still think Kamara is worth a start. A decent RB2 against the Panthers. Everyone deserves an upgrade. But I will mention in his last 5 games against the Panthers, he's averaging 14 points per game on just under 19 touches, 3 touchdowns in that sample size. But in week 1, he put up 110 yards and a touchdown on 20 touches, 5 catches. He was great, 19.5 points. Kamara was amazing in week 1. So it's all dependent on the quarterback. I think he'll be elite if Carr's available. But if Rattler's the guy, he'll still put up good numbers, still be a top 20 play because the matchup is that good. At number 19, Tony Pollard also gets an elite matchup against the Patriots. They rank number 2, last 5 games allowing 29 points per game to the position on 153 rushing yards per game, 8 total touchdowns. The running backs dominate the Patriots as of late. So Pollard is clearly their RB1, especially on the ground. He's getting by far more of the touches. Tyjae Spears sometimes factors into the passing game, but on the ground, Pollard is their workhorse. So that'll continue for him. Tyjae might not even play for the 3rd week in a row. It's possible that happens. But over the last 4 games, Pollard's been very safe in his own right. 13.7 points per game ranks as RB17. I rank him here at number 19, so I'm kind of downgrading him, which I probably shouldn't be. 21 touches per game, 2.5 catches, 95 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. He's a very safe part of their offense, going to be involved every single week, and usually is the safest bet to find the end zone. So really good matchup here. I think he goes over 100 rushing yards on the Patriots and probably finds the end zone. I think Pollard is a very safe, elite flex play this week, a top 20 option for me in week 9. Number 20, I have Bijan Robinson Jr. at the Giants, and man, this position is just so loaded. It feels too low to rank him at 20, but he has been banged up lately, and his volume has ticked down in his last 4 games, averaging 13.5 points per game on 15 touches, 1 catch, 69 yards per game, but 4 touchdowns. He didn't score last week, but nobody did other than Noah Brown on that Hail Mary, and B-Rob is usually the safest bet to find the end zone. That's what happens in this Cliff Kingsbury offense. The running back almost always scores a touchdown, and he's probably going to get back to pay dirt this week. If you look at this matchup, the Giants are average, but they also give up 4.9 yards per carry. I think Robinson will be efficient in this matchup. And if you look at his last 5 games historically against the Giants, he's also been really good from an efficiency standpoint. 12.5 points per game on 17.2 touches, 2.2 catches, 102 yards per game with only 1 touchdown in those 5 games. So a 10-point floor is what he offers against the Giants no matter what in his career. This year, he's also giving you a touchdown almost no matter what as well. So if that happens, I'm probably ranking B-Rob a little too low, but they usually hold him out of the end zone. It is a tricky divisional matchup. And last time around, they did not score any touchdowns in this matchup. So they won on field goals. I think that could possibly happen again. I think he will be fine, but if he doesn't find the end zone, he'll be more of a low-end RB2. That's why I only have him at number 20. Bijan Robinson, though, still probably a player you're starting no matter what. The touchdown is usually there for him. At 21, one of the best flex plays this week, in my opinion, would be Chase Brown against the Raiders. Last week was a very difficult matchup. The Eagles are not a matchup you want, so I'm not worried about his poor performance I'm very encouraged because Zach Moss has fallen considerably in the offense. So Chase Brown will bounce back. He's clearly their RB1, and he's usually a safe bet to find the end zone, especially if T. Higgins does not play again. Then I think it's even a safer bet that Brown does score a touchdown. In his last 4 games, that's what he's been doing with 3 touchdowns, 14 touches, 2.3 catches, only 51 yards per game. He's still averaging double-digit fantasy points, 10.8 points per game, and last week was a big letdown. So he will bounce back. I think he will be a top 21 running back this week. I do think he finds the end zone. I think Chase Brown will be a great play in your lineup. Number 22, I'm a little concerned about James Conner, though, at number 22. It's a bit lower than where I normally rank him. So I am downgrading him against the Bears. Their defense can be tricky, and while they do give up 4.9 yards per carry, they give up very little in the passing game to opposing running backs, 10 yards less than league average per game. So James Conner could be limited in that regard, and he's also fumbled in the last 4 games with only 1 touchdown as well. The touchdown has been evading him as of late. So that's where I am concerned. The Bears can definitely shut you down. They held the Commanders' offense to no touchdowns except for that Hail Mary. So it could definitely happen again. This win means a lot to Chicago, and it could be a playoff tiebreaker at the end of the season for a wild card spot. So I think the Bears defense will step up. Conner should get his typical volume, but lately he's not been scoring a touchdown, and I don't think it comes back to him, so that's why I'm downgrading him this week. Only RB22, but a very good flex play, very high-end option, pretty bust-proof. I think 9 points is guaranteed, but without the touchdown, you may not go over 10. So a slight downgrade, but still probably a player you're starting. At 23, I have Chuba Hubbard versus New Orleans, who, if I knew for a fact that Jonathan Brooks was inactive, I'd probably rank closer to like Kareem Hunt, Tyrone Tracy, Alvin Kamara, maybe like 5+ spots higher than 23. But I do think Brooks will get on the field. He's been practicing in limited capacity 5 of the last 6 opportunities. And while he's yet to make his season debut, when he does, I think they will give him that feel-good welcome to the team touchdown that we've seen often throughout the league. Off an injury, first game with the team, a situation like this definitely encourages the team to give that player the touchdown. So if Brooks does score, how many touchdowns are actually available for the Panthers offense? That's why I'm worried. I do think Hubbard will be their main guy. Definitely going to see more volume, definitely the safer bet, but I worry that he does not find the end zone if I am indeed right about Brooks getting that gimme touchdown. So that's my concern. I don't think the ceiling is unlocked for Hubbard this week, but the matchup's top 4. The Saints give up 131 rushing yards per game on 5.5 yards per carry, another 44 receiving yards per game, and 7 touchdowns to the running back position over the last 5 games, about 28 points per game. So there's a lot of points to be had here. Just think of Javonte Williams a couple weeks ago. I still think Hubbard could play very well. Even without the touchdown, he could easily go over 100 yards. If his volume continues, he has 18.5 touches per game in his last 4. I think he will be fine, will go over 10 fantasy points, but it's a little bit tricky about that touchdown. I would feel safer with him if Brooks was inactive. So this will be probably the last week I really trust him as a clear top 25 player. If Brooks is healthier than we expect, Hubbard could be losing a lot of value very quickly. So I think he'll be fine, at least until the bye. After that, though, we might see Brooks as the more valuable player. It will start to pivot towards Brooks as the weeks go by. But for now, I'm still starting Hubbard as a high-end flex play. I still think he's worth a start. The matchup is a big reason why. Number 24, I have Rico Dowdle at Atlanta, who is not the safest bet to play. I mean, he had a bye 2 weeks ago. He was inactive last week with an illness, and he didn't play too well against Detroit the week prior. So there isn't like a ton of upside with Dowdle. This offense is not great, and it's not like he's the most talented player we've ever seen. But in his last 4 games, the floor is decent, an average of 9.8 points per game, only 11 touches per game, 2 catches per game, 58 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. But his recent volume has been ticking up. At least it was before the bye. So although he's the RB 32 in points per game, I do still think he's worth a start this week because the matchup is also top 7. The Falcons give up 24 points per game to the position, 6 touchdowns, a lot of receptions, over 7 running back catches per game. That's the most in the NFL, and about 140 total yards from scrimmage to the position on top of that. So I think he'll be fine. Definitely a good matchup here that he can take advantage of. It was very frustrating for him to be inactive last week, but if he plays, I think he will reclaim that RB1 job. I'm not worried about Ezekiel Elliott or Dalvin Cook. They're no threat at all. So 20 touches with 5 catches is always possible for him. That is why the floor is decent, but he's not the safest play, pretty touchdown dependent. But other than CeeDee Lamb, he's probably the safest bet to actually score. So he's fine. It's mainly the matchup that has me encouraged, why I still rank him top 25. But there is some risk with Dowdle. He's not the most talented player on the field. Number 25 and 26, though, back-to-back, I have Rachaad White and Bucky Irving at the Chiefs. Very bad matchup. It's the worst matchup in the NFL. The Chiefs only give up 10.9 points per game in their last 5. It has been the toughest spot to be in. Only 2.7 yards per carry has led to 48 rushing yards per game and only 1 running back touchdown. It's very difficult to do anything against the Chiefs in fantasy. So I want to rank them higher as they are key parts of this offense, especially without the receivers. And there's a lot of upside, especially in the passing game for both players. But this is the league's toughest matchup for the position, so I have to downgrade them. And with the nature of their touch split, even if they play well, 10 plus points isn't guaranteed without a touchdown. So that's really what I'm worried about. But Bucky Irving is just as involved as Rachaad. They're in a 50-50 split. And Irving had 7 targets last week. Usually Rachaad is the pass catcher. Given their situation, they need everyone to step up to catch passes. So I trust the floor, but this week I worry about the ceiling. I think you should downgrade them. They're on the fringe cutoff point for the flex this week. I do worry about the upside with the Bucs running backs against Kansas City. At 27, I have Alexander Mattison at the Bengals, and the Bengals aren't like the best matchup overall, but they do give up a lot of rushing touchdowns, 7 overall to the position this season. So it's usually a safe bet that running backs do find the end zone, and Mattison is clearly the workhorse for the Raiders. He's not flashy, but he's by far and away overtaken Jahmyr White. 20 plus touches is definitely possible for him, and the Bengals probably let him in the end zone, so I do think Mattison is a legit flex play this week. I rarely rank him in the top 30, but his floor has been good. The last 4 games averaging 10.7 points per game. That's not terrible. It ranks 29th at the position in that sample size. So if the touchdown hits, I think you'll be happy. At RB27, I do think Mattison deserves a little bit of flex consideration in this game. At 28, I think I'm benching J.K. Dobbins this week. I think this is the cutoff point where I want to keep these players on the bench. And usually I do rank Dobbins top 20, but I'm worried about this matchup. It ranks bottom 5. The Browns in the last 5 games only give up 16.8 points per game to the position on 90 rushing yards, less than 20 receiving yards. League average is about 32, and only 4 touchdowns this year. So it's not a great matchup. It's not the worst, but I do think it's probably a more low-scoring game, and I could see it be very reliant on field goals, not touchdowns. So I worry that Dobbins does not find the end zone. I think he's just a floor play, and he's only giving you 75 yards per game on 20 touches the last 4 games. An average of 12 points per game is a bit reliant on those 2 touchdowns. So without it, I do not think he goes over 10 points, and Herbert has been getting into a bit more of a rhythm throwing the ball lately, so I'm not convinced that Dobbins will put up his best game this week. The Browns are a legit downgrade. I think Dobbins is a very low-end flex play this week, a player I'm considering for the bench more so than my actual starting lineup. I rank Mattison above him. I think that's a pretty big reason to bench him. Number 29, I have Tank Bigsby at Philly, who I know has been lights out lately. Last 4 games, an average of 15.3 points per game. But I hate this matchup. The Eagles rank bottom 2 against the position, only giving up 15.8 points per game on 72 rushing yards per game, 2 touchdowns, and only 3.7 yards per carry. The only matchup that's worse would be the Kansas City Chiefs. So big downgrade. We saw Chase Brown play very poorly last week against them as well. And I do worry that Bigsby does not find the end zone in this game. There's also the threat that Etienne does return to the field, especially given how injured this offense has become in just 1 week. Brian Thomas Jr. will be out for 2 to 4 weeks. Christian Kirk might be out for the season. So they can only rely on Evan Ingram to do so much. Beyond him, I really worry that this offense will struggle to move the ball in this game. So I think the Jags are going to look really bad on offense, and I really hate this matchup for Bigsby. So I don't think he finds the end zone. I think the ceiling is capped for him, and it's also possible that Etienne does return to the field. He has been limited each of the last 2 weeks in practice, despite being inactive. So at some point, he will come back. Bigsby's also not catching any passes, so he's very reliant on those big rush attempts and touchdowns. I think neither are available. I think Bigsby's very unsafe this week. I would recommend you bench Tank Bigsby in week 9, despite all of the volume. At number 30, I'm also benching Rhamondre Stevenson at Tennessee. I just don't trust him, honestly. Last 4 games has been reliant on those touchdowns. He has 3 touchdowns last 4 games, an average of 11.7 points per game. But if you take it out of the equation, you're only getting about 7 points per game, 7.5. So that's what I'm worried about. I really don't trust Rhamondre to score a touchdown all of the time. And although he scored a touchdown last week, I don't think the offense actually wants to rely on him as much. It definitely doesn't need to when Drake May is the quarterback. But May is in the concussion protocol, so we might get Brissett at quarterback again. If that's the case, they will rely more on Rhamondre, but probably be less efficient. So he's not a great play. I don't think this is a high-scoring game. I'd rather pass on Stevenson against the Titans. I'd also rather pass on Javonte Williams at Baltimore. He fell back down to earth last week after a blow-up game against the Saints. But the Saints are one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. The Ravens are not. They only give up 3.3 yards per carry for 65 rushing yards per game. But they are vulnerable in the passing game. They allow 46 receiving yards per game to running backs, along with 3 receiving touchdowns over the last 5 games, and that is where he could get some work. They're going to be trailing for sure. Maybe the catch-up mode offers some checkdowns, but I do worry about Javonte. His success has been extremely matchup dependent as of late, and he also got vultured by McLaughlin on the goal line again last week. So in a difficult matchup, I have no hope for him, and I don't trust him to actually be the guy on the goal line in those few opportunities that the Broncos will get this year. So Javonte has definitely been better than I've expected lately. I thought he would have lost more of a grip on his job at this point, but I'm still not convinced that he loses it before the year is over. There's still plenty of time for that to happen. So I don't trust him. We'll see what happens. But at RB31, I would bench Javonte in a tough matchup against the Ravens. At 32, I have Nick Chubb versus the Chargers, who gets a tough matchup. They rank bottom 3 against the position, only giving up 93 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, but 4.8 yards per carry. So maybe Nick Chubb is efficient on the ground, but I don't think he finds the end zone. They have been very stout near the goal line. And although Nick Chubb is the RB1 for the Browns, he's not getting like a ton of volume in 2 games this season. Only 14 touches per game for 42 yards per game. He's very touchdown dependent to go off for more than 10 points. So I'm very worried about the floor. He did get more volume last week in his second game this season, but there is a chance that Jerome Ford returns to the field and does impact the volume. I still don't trust Chubb to get you 20 touches. So I feel like he's a bit of a liability in your starting lineup. I think without a touchdown, you will get burned for sure. But behind Nick Chubb, I do have Jonathan Brooks versus the Saints, who's questionable to play. He has yet to make his debut off of IR, but he has been practicing the last 2 weeks, 5 out of 6 opportunities. He was limited in practice. I think he could get on the field in week 9. At worst, he'll be back in week 10, but it might happen this week. And if it does, I kind of feel like they will give him that welcome to the team touchdown that I mentioned earlier. In his first game with the team, he's a second-round pick coming off an injury. He does represent their future at the position starting next year. So I think he will get a touchdown if healthy. I think he probably won't get more than 10 or 12 touches, but one of them, if it's near the goal line, will be given to him. So I think that happens. I think that 6 points is safe to bet on. Probably not safe to bet on the following week, but why I'm still trusting him as well in terms of efficiency would be this matchup. The Saints do rank top 4 against the position. They give up a ton of yards and touchdowns as well. So I think the floor is decent if he does actually play and gets 8, 10, maybe 12 touches. I think you'll get about 10 points because 6 of them will be a touchdown. But it's always risky that doesn't happen at all. I am kind of just assuming it. We've never seen it. So I am factoring in some risk. I'm wrong. At 33, he's kind of a desperation flex play, not a safe option. I'd still probably keep him on the bench. I'd rather see it before I fully endorse it. Top 25. Number 34, I have Raheem Mostert at the Buffalo Bills, another backup here who could find the end zone. He did score 2 touchdowns a few weeks ago, but that was while Achane had a concussion, and I don't expect similar volume for him with Achane healthy. But in his last 3 games, he is averaging 10.4 points per game. Pretty reliant on the touchdown, though, but has been efficient for about 60 yards per game. That's not the end of the world. So Mostert in a very good matchup against the Bills could play well. The Bills do rank top 4 against running backs in fantasy. So decent spot. There is some upside, but very touchdown dependent, kind of like Jonathan Brooks. Without it, you will get burned. So good luck with Mostert, but he's not the worst play if you're desperate with a backup in your lineup. Number 35, I have Ekeler, another backup here, and that's basically the case with everyone moving forward. But Ekeler's usually a pretty safe option for about 7 points. That's what he's averaging over his last 4, 7.3. And although he only gets 9 touches per game, he's very efficient, turning that into 61 yards per game. Without any touchdowns, though, you never get that ceiling. So I do trust him as a bust-proof option, but because you never get the touchdown, 10 plus points is very unlikely. So all you can expect is about 7, 8 points from Ekeler, but he rarely gives you less than 5, and it's a bummer he's not getting more work because he's been very efficient. But Bijan Robinson is the go-to guy. It's just how it is. So Ekeler at RB35, not terrible, but probably doesn't go over 8 points. At number 36, I have Roschon Johnson at Arizona, who does have 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games, averaging 8.5 points per game is something, but it'd be crazy for that to repeat all year long. At some point, it will evaporate, and I only really trust DeAndre Swift in this backfield, but they do use Roschon on the goal line if they're not using a backup center. That was a terrible decision. So I think Roschon's decent, but you're really just betting on a touchdown. Buyer beware. If he doesn't score, you're screwed. At 37, also screwed if he doesn't find the end zone. It's Ray Davis versus Miami, and he was back to only 6 touches in week 8 in the rain versus Seattle. It looks like James Cook is healthy again and back to being the lead guy in that backfield. So he's a great handcuff, but probably not a player you're starting if James Cook is active. He's too risky. At 38, I think I'm benching Zach Moss at this point. He's been bad with 1 fumble, no touchdowns in the last 4 games, only 4.5 points on average. So he's fallen a lot from that 50-50 split we saw at the beginning of the year. And while he's interesting if Chase Brown goes down, I don't think I'm willing to start him if Brown is healthy. At 39, I have Allgeier versus Dallas, who does give you 7.4 points per game on average the last 4, but it's hard to predict when he's actually like getting solid volume. Occasionally he gets like 12 touches, but it's just not safe to know when that'll happen. The game needs to turn into a heavy running game script. They usually work in the passing game. So Allgeier, interesting, but very risky. At 40, same goes with Etienne. He might not even play. He's been inactive the last 3 games, but at some point he will get back on the field. With all the injuries, maybe he does get going in the passing game. Bigsby doesn't catch passes, so maybe that's the role for him that he has. I don't trust him at all. I definitely prefer Bigsby, but it's a bad matchup as well. I don't think you're starting a Jags running back this week with confidence. Definitely not Etienne, that's for sure. These last 10, though, I just want to to show you for the sake of the watch list. We will see what happens, and maybe their starter goes down. Maybe they have some value as of next week. But Charbonnet at 41 sometimes gets involved, sometimes finds the end zone. Very touchdown dependent, though. I'd rather avoid it. Not enough volume to trust in fantasy. At 42, a very good matchup for Tyjae Spears against the Patriots this week, but he has been inactive the last 2 games. He's been banged up. He might miss once again. Hard to trust, but there could be a role for him in a good matchup against New England. At 43, this is a bit of a gut call. He's never really getting much volume, but with Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins unavailable, I think it's a heavy run game for the Texans here, and it feels unwise to give Joe Mixon 30-plus touches on a short week on Thursday night. So I do think Pierce will get on the field a bit more than usual. I think he'll give Mixon some rest a bit more often, but I could totally be wrong. Pierce could be irrelevant. At 43, you're probably not starting him at all. 44, hard to trust Justice Hill all the time, but sometimes they throw it to him like crazy, so it could be one of those games. I doubt it, though. Number 45, I have Jaleel McLaughlin at Baltimore. Random touchdowns do hit for him, but he's unlikely to get 2 in a row, but you never know. It could happen. Number 46, I have Dearness Johnson, who is involved, especially with Etienne unavailable. Bigsby doesn't catch passes, so Dearness does offer that role. At number 47, I have Deontay Foreman, who does appear to be the backup behind Nick Chubb, but until Ford comes back, even that is not that valuable. At 48, I have Braylon Allen versus Houston, who is very annoying, very random usage for him, but he could score a touchdown any given week. But it is a fluke when it happens. It happened last week. It probably doesn't happen for the second game in a row. At 49, I have Jalen Wright versus Arizona, who's not completely irrelevant, but also hard to trust in that Dolphins backfield. And the last player ranked would be Tyler Goodson at Minnesota. Should be more checkdowns available with Flacco in Indianapolis, but obviously Taylor is the workhorse. He probably doesn't come off the field often, but if he does, I do think Goodson is the main backup behind Taylor, and maybe he gets a few more checkdowns rest of season. I do think he's more valuable than Trey Sermon. So that's it for this video. These are my top 40 rankings at the position here on the screen, where I think the top 20 are loaded. Holy shit. There are very good matchups for very good players and a lot of guys averaging over 100 rushing yards per game. There's literally over 10 players that have that as a floor, and they're also scoring touchdowns. So I think you can expect 20 plus points from literally the top 8. I think all the way through DeAndre Swift. In good matchups, you are getting fantastic point totals, definitely great locks in your lineup. So really trust running back, some high-end options, and I think all the way through Tyrone Tracy, you feel very safe in the floor as well. Kamara should be good in a good matchup, but he's been bad lately. Quarterback situation a little bit dicey, so he's kind of more in the flex conversation, but honestly, him, RB18 through Bucky, Irving, I think are players I'd like to be starting in my lineup. I do think they go over 10 points most likely because of their roles in their offense. But that Chiefs matchup is concerning. I get it if you'd rather bench the Bucks backfield and just avoid the bad matchup. But even Mattison could score a touchdown, could go over 10 points, and it's not the worst thing in the world, even beyond the top 25. But once we hit Tank Bigsby, Rhamondre Stevenson, I do think that is the ultimate cutoff point. You have to be very desperate, very in need of backup running backs with a depleted, injury-riddled roster to consider players outside the top 30. So good luck if you are in that situation. But if you are, I think the last player to consider that does have that upside and decent role would probably be Roschon Johnson and Ray Davis. I think that is the true cutoff point. You might luck out with a touchdown with Brooks, Mostert, and Chubb. You might have a decent floor with Ekeler, but you're just praying for a touchdown with Roschon and Davis. That is it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'm happy to answer your questions, so comment down below. I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.